Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is kicking off a brand new series from the wonderful mind of CarlB1961, author of the People Think I'm a Serial Killer, but It's Far Worse Than That series. And let me tell you from the get-go, this one gets chilling and extremely nail-biting. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Document Found by the Police in an Empty Cabin. Part 1. Let's get straight into that. As I write this, pen trembling in my shaking hand, I can hear it still outside the cabin, snarling and howling. It doesn't try to come in because of the light, but that won't last much longer. The generator is almost out of fuel and the lights will start flickering again any time now. It's only a matter of time before the generator shuts down, taking the electricity and the light, my only source of salvation, with it. And then I'll be dead. Like Scott and Maddie and Alex and Samantha. I could try running out the back door, but I saw how fast that thing moves when it took Scott. I know I don't stand a chance. It would be on me before I got more than 10 feet. And we were just some typical dumb teenagers, doing your typical dumb teenage stuff. The 5 of us had graduated from high school just the last week, and this was supposed to be our last big hurrah before splitting up and going our separate ways. Me, Alex and Samantha to various colleges in different parts of the country. Maddie to look for a new job in the city, and Scott was joining the army. We had all been friends since we were kids, and I think we were all depressed by the fact that our friendship, along with the freedom and lack of responsibility that comes with being a reckless, immature teenager, was coming to an end. We were all adults now, about to face life in the real world for the first time on our own. It was Alex's idea to go to his family's cabin in the woods up north, 40 miles from our hometown and 5 miles from the nearest town. It had originally been his uncle's cabin, but he had died when Alex was 6. And since he was a lifelong bachelor and Alex's parents were his only close relatives, they had inherited the place. They came up a couple of times with Alex for summer vacations, but Alex's parents both had full-time careers, and after a couple of years, I guess, they decided it just wasn't worth the time or trouble to pack up the car and make the 80-mile round trip to stay for a week at a cabin in the middle of nowhere without cable or Wi-Fi. They were planning on selling the cabin soon, so this was our last chance to put it to use before it went on to the market. And so 4 days ago, we all met up at Scott's place, bags in hand, loaded up into his battered old Chevy Impala and hit the road. 35 miles and 2 pit stops at gas stations to stock up on essentials of teenage life, junk food, soda, and a couple of cases of beer, courtesy of Scott's fake ID. Later, Scott turned off the main highway onto a rutted, bumpy dirt road that ran through the woods the last 5 miles to the cabin. The road seemed to get narrower the deeper we went, the trees pressing in on both sides and seeming to loom over the car. It made us all the more than a little uneasy, I think. I imagine we were all envisioning scenarios from the various B-grade horror movies that we'd binge-watched as a group over the years. I know I was definitely getting some Evil Dead vibes as we approached and the cabin loomed closer and closer. And finally, we were there. Alex's family cabin wasn't much to look at. Your basic rustic log-style single-story with a small tool shed off to one side. There were only 4 rooms, the main room with a small kitchen area off to the side, a tiny bathroom and 2 bedrooms. When we arrived, Maddie commented that there were no power lines leading to the house, and Alex explained that the electricity was supplied by a gas generator out back and with a 55-gallon drum to refuel it. While Alex went round back to fill and crank the generator to life, the rest of us carried our stuff inside and began unpacking. It wasn't really as bad inside as we thought it would be, and once Alex got the generator going, the place even had running water, supplied by a pump, and it didn't take us long to get it settled in. The girls had one room, and me and Scott had the other, although he insisted we sleep on opposite directions of the bed so that things didn't get weird. And Alex, being our host, took the big couch in the main room. Once it got dark, we cut loose. In addition to the beer, Scott had smuggled along a bag containing 2 ounces of NYC diesel. That's marijuana for those of you who aren't in the know. And after a while, we were having a party and a pretty great time. That night was one of the happiest memories of my life. I was with my best friends, miles away from civilization, acting wild without parents or authority figures looming over my shoulder with disapproving scowls. I didn't have a care in the world. Hard to believe it was only 4 days ago. It already feels like a lifetime. It was also the last good time I ever had, the last good time any of us had. The horror started not long after. Document found by the police in an empty cabin. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. The next morning, or rather early afternoon, we got up, more than a little hungover and strung out by the previous evening's escapade. And after a late breakfast consisting of Twinkies, Slim Jims and assorted energy drinks, we tried to make up our minds about what to do with the day. The girls wanted to go hiking. Alex mentioned that there was a lake about a mile behind the cabin and suggested the 3 of us, him, me and Scott, go fishing. His family kept their fishing stuff at the cabin, and no one could think of anything better to do, and so we agreed. We had gotten off to a late start that day, so it was already past 3 when we headed off, fishing rods in hand, down a path through the woods in the rear of the cabin. It was a beautiful early summer's afternoon, the sun bright, the woods buzzing with sounds of birds, insects and assorted wildlife. Scott and Alex were in the lead and I was bringing up the rear. About halfway to the lake, I felt a call of nature. A call to the others to wait up and stepped off the path into the woods to take a piss. I went about 20 feet for a little privacy. After I finished my business, I zipped up and started back. I didn't get more than a couple of feet before my foot fetched up against something and I tripped flat on my face. Shit! I got up and no worse for wear apart from a few minor scrapes. And after dusting myself off, I looked back to see what I had tripped over, expecting to see a rock or protruding tree root. Instead, I saw the corner of a perfectly smooth white slab of stone emerging from the earth. Intrigued, I crouched down to examine this find more closely. No more than 6 inches of it was protruding from the soil. I dusted it off, thinking it might be an old foundation of some previously standing building. I should have just let it go and caught up with Scott and Alex. If I had, none of the nightmare that followed would have happened, and my friends and I would still be alive. In another moment, I probably would have just lost interest and done just that, but then I noticed there appeared to be something chiselled into the surface of the stone, some kind of design or insignia. I could just make out a little of it, because most of the slab was still buried under a couple of inches of dirt. "Yo, James," Scott called from the path. "You finished yet?" I called back, "You guys, come check this out." Scott and Alex arrived a moment later, and I pointed. "Look at this." They stared at the slab. "What the fuck is this thing?" Scott muttered. He turned expectantly to Alex. This was his family's property after all, and if anyone knew what this was, it was him. Alex, he just shrugged, perplexed. I have no idea what this is. This is the first time I've seen it. I said, whatever it is, there's more of it underground, and I think there's something written on it. And we were all curious now, our fishing expedition completely forgotten. Let's dig it up. Alex ran back to the cabin and fetched a couple of shovels. It took me and Scott about 40 minutes to uncover the rest of the slab. It was much bigger than we had first thought, about 8 long and 6 feet wide. I brushed away the rest of the remaining dirt and we wordlessly regarded what we had unearthed. The inscription was fully revealed now, an ornate Celtic cross, 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. All 3 of us were blown away. This is pretty wild, Scott muttered. Hey, what are you guys doing? A voice suddenly called out, causing us to jump about a foot into the air. It was the 2 girls, Samantha and Maddie, approaching. We thought you were going fishing, Samantha said. And Scott gestured to the stone slab. Look what we found. They joined us, standing around the slab, looking at it for some time in a perplexed silence. What do you think it is? Maddie asked no one in particular. No fucking clue, Scott shrugged. But whatever it is, it looks old as shit. And Scott was right about that. This thing had been buried for a long time, and from the look of it, waiting for someone to find it. I don't know what compelled me to do what I did next. It was as if some unseen force was guiding me, subtly manipulating me to its will to do its own bidding, while at the same time giving me the illusion of being in complete control of my own actions and thoughts. I knelt down, placed my ear against the slab, and rubbed my knuckles hard against it. I listened. I heard a faint echo. You guys, I think it's hollow. There's something underneath it, some space or something. Scott grinned wildly in excitement. Well, let's pull that fucker up. All at once we began talking, clambering over each other with our different ideas and opinions. Alex wanted to leave the slab alone and contact the authorities, if it really was something old that made it an archaeological find, and thus we had no right to disturb it. Maddie and Samantha thought we were wasting our time over something pointless and stupid. They reminded us that this was supposed to be our last vacation together as a group, not dig up some dumb old rock. Scott was convinced that there was something amazing buried behind the stone. He speculated wildly on everything from ancient pirate treasure to some lost Mayan civilization. I myself stayed silent. I was conflicted. On one hand, I shared Scott's excitement over the possibilities of what was hidden below the slab. On another, I understood Alex's ethical concerns over disturbing a possible archaeological site. And on still another hand, I felt an irrational and overwhelming kernel of fear and dread forming in the core of my soul. Part of me wanted to forget about the slab, to just cover it over again and leave it and never speak of it again, to hope that it lay buried and forgotten for all of time. I think some small part of me sensed even then that no good would come of us moving that slab, that it was there for a reason, and whatever it was hiding was bad news, and that it had been buried to protect the world from some horrible secret, and that by removing it we would be unleashing a horror unlike anything we had ever encountered in our worst nightmares. But I was still a teenager, still curious, and that curiosity overwhelmed and overrode my common sense and self-preservation. That immature, irresponsible desire to rush headlong into things for the thrill of it, without first thinking of the possible consequences and outcomes. Or maybe there was more to it. Maybe it was an unseen force guiding me to my decision all along. I finally said, Scott's right. We need to see what's under this thing. It was the worst mistake of my life. And the only consolation is, it is probably also the last. Document found by the police in an empty cabin. Part 3. Let's get straight into that. It was already getting late, past 5, by the time we decided to remove the slab, and so, with some reluctance from Scott, we agreed to leave it for the day and get to work bright and early tomorrow. There was some more partying that night, but it was more subdued than the previous evening. I think we were all preoccupied with our find out in the woods. Even Samantha and Maddie were intrigued now by what possible secrets lay hidden beneath that rock. Conquistador gold, Viking loot, Prohibition-era bootleg liquor. Only Alex still showed some hesitation at the thought of moving it. But Scott had a majority vote, so he finally conceded and agreed to help us. And being drunken, irresponsible teens, we once again slept in late, so much for the bright and early. And it wasn't till around noon that we had sobered up enough to fill up to going out on our little adventure. And so we headed back to the woods, armed with tools, and set about excavating the stone. I could tell right from the start it wasn't going to be an easy job. The slab was about 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, and looked to be at least 4 inches thick, and probably weighed close to a ton. It was going to take all 5 of us working as a team to move it enough to see what was underneath, and it would probably take most of the day. Not to mention a whole lot of back-breaking labour. First, we wedged crowbars under one side of it and, working in unison, managed to hoist it up a few inches, just enough for Alex to slide some 2x4s under it to act as ramps. Then, moving to the other side, and with a lot of grunting and straining, we began to push it with all of our combined strength. And slowly, but surely, minute by minute, inch by painful inch, the slab began to move, sliding up the ramps and gradually revealing a dark rectangular recess beneath. We'd move it an inch at a time, taking breaths in between, sweaty and exhausted, to catch our breath and then get back to it. First 4 inches of black space were revealed, and then 8 inches, and then a foot, and then 2 feet. And finally, we decided we had moved it enough to sufficiently clear the hole and fell back, gasping for breath and sore all over. And by the time we finished the job, the day was shut. It was just past 8 p.m, and none of us could believe we'd been out working out there for 8 whole hours, and there was only about an hour of sunlight left. We had spent one of our precious last few days of friendship hauling a goddamn giant rock out of the ground. Whatever was on the other side had better be awesome, as Scott had made it out to be, or we probably would have murdered him. After taking a few minutes to recover, Scott took out a flashlight from his pocket. "Okay guys, moment of truth." He clicked it on and, with a dramatic pause to draw out the suspense, aimed it down into the opening. We looked eagerly down, breath held with anticipation. What we saw wasn't anything we expected to. No pirate gold or Viking treasure or artifacts from some long-lost civilization. Instead, what we saw was steps. Stone steps descending into darkness. We looked down for a long time, speechless with astonishment. "What the fuck?" Scott exclaimed. Another moment of silence. "Where do you think it goes?" Samantha whispered. Scott shrugged. "Only one way to find out. Let's go down and see." Immediately, Alex and the girls began to protest. We had no idea where those steps led or what they led to. Alex tried to reason with Scott and persuade him to put off exploring for another day. It was getting late and we were exhausted, but Scott could not be swayed. He was like a kid on Christmas morning, eager to get downstairs and see what Santa brought him. And he was practically shitting himself with excitement. "Come on, you pussies! There could be a fortune down there waiting for us. We'd all be rich!" "And maybe there is, but for all we know, it could be booby-trapped," Alex countered. "Haven't you ever seen Temple of Doom?" I think he was actually referring to the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I can't be sure. I was never a big Indiana Jones fan. "Look," Scott said in a tone of exasperated finality, "I'm going down there to check it out. If the rest of you are too chicken shit to follow me, well," he shrugged, "more for me." And with that, he began to descend the steps. Alex and I exchanged a look of dismay and shrugged at each other and resigned. We knew we were going to follow him, and he knew it too. We'd been through too much together for too long not to have each other's back. We tried to convince Maddie and Samantha to come with us, but they flat out refused. I can't say I blame them. Maybe it was chauvinistic to say, but women usually do have more common sense than men. And so, with a feeling that we were doing something incredibly stupid, perhaps even dangerous, me and Alex turned and started down after Scott. The steps went down about 20 feet. Scott was waiting for us at the bottom. He held the flashlight under his face so we could see his pleased grin. "I knew I could count on my bros," he said. Then he turned and started moving down the narrow tunnel. And like the idiots we were, we went after him. It was dark, and Scott was the only one with an actual flashlight, so me and Alex had to use the flashlight apps on our phones to see where we were going. The tunnel only went on for about 10 feet before opening into a much wider space. I could tell, intuitively, that was where whatever we had come down here for was waiting. And with a slight hesitation, we entered. As we had been walking, I had begun to notice a smell. I had actually first detected it before we had even finished going down those steps, but it had been faint at first, subtle. But the further we went, the stronger it became. And when we stepped into that chamber, it became overpowering. I could tell from the way Alex and Scott were gagging and covering their noses that they could smell it too. It reminded me of the indoor Easter egg hunt from when I had been a kid. It had been an exceptionally rainy April that year, as I recall. And when it was finished, one egg had been unaccounted for. And we finally found it by the smell about a month later, hidden in a tissue box on the mantel. That smell reminded me somewhat of this smell, the rancid egg smell of sulphur, but it was different somehow, more pungent, and seemed to have some other underlying odours to it. A rank, musty smell, the stench of old corruption, the stench of something dead that had been buried for a long, long time. Something about that putrid stench made my skin crawl and filled me with a sense of existential terror, a soul-crushing despair. I can't even really explain it in words. You would have had to have been there. But something about that smell was oppressive, malevolent. That's the only way I can describe it. If evil had a scent, then that's what we were smelling in that godless, lightless, underground room. Pure evil. It was so palpable, I could almost feel it on my skin. I think right then I wanted to turn around and run back the way we had come. And judging from the wide-eyed expressions on Alex and Scott's faces, I think they were feeling the same way and could sense exactly what I was feeling. But we had already come too far. I think even then we were already past the point of no return. We could only go forward. Scott shined his flashlight around the space we were in. It was a rectangular room, maybe 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. Stone walls, stone floor, stone ceiling from which moisture was dripping steadily, forming a shallow pool of stagnant water on the ground. The walls were coated with a sickening yellow-green slime. It kind of resembled an Egyptian burial chamber, and that's exactly what it was. A burial chamber. A tomb. The beam of Scott's flashlight locked onto an object in the centre of the room and held there. We stared for a moment. We didn't even breathe. On a raised stone platform stood an oblong wooden box about 8 feet long. It was wrapped in rusted chains, and placed on top of it was an iron Celtic cross about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was identical to the one that was engraved upon the surface of the stone slab. I knew immediately what that box was. A coffin. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity, staring speechlessly. And then slowly, cautiously, both Alex and Scott approached the coffin for a closer look. I didn't join them. I had noticed something else in the rear of the chamber. I went to the far wall and held my light to it. There was some kind of inscription written there, etched into the stone. It appeared to be written in Latin, and I could only read the bottom of it. Part of the inscription was covered with that slime, and part of it had eroded over the years by the water that had leaked into the tomb. I couldn't tell what it said. I didn't know any Latin. But, without really thinking about it, I snapped a photo of it with my phone. And this is what it said. Me Domini di nostri, di patris omnipotentis, permitto illam naquam sum liberatis, vicula hic in ellis annus. I still don't know what it means. I would run it through Google Translate to see what it says in English, but my phone doesn't have internet access. I wish to God I knew what that inscription said. It might have shed some light on the terror and bloodshed my friends and I endured. Might have given us some idea of what exactly we were up against. When I turned around, Scott and Alex were on either side of the coffin, shining their lights on it. I was struck by a sudden, predestined wave of horror, a premonition of doom. It was like I was watching a scene from a movie I had already seen 100 times before, and I knew exactly what was about to happen next. Alex, seemingly in slow motion, reached down and lifted the iron cross that lay across the top of the coffin. I think he intended to examine it more closely. I'll never know for sure. Alarmed, I screamed out, "No, don't!" And it happened instantly. There was no suspenseful horror movie build-up to it, no tension-filled moment of calm before the horror struck. As soon as Alex removed the cross from the coffin, there was a hideous, ungodly roar, a sound that seemed to reverberate in the stone confines of the tomb and felt like it was piercing my eardrums. It was an unnatural sound, a sound I had never heard before in my life, a sound I don't think anyone had ever heard before. It was a sound made by something that didn't belong in this world. In the next instant, before any of us could react, something burst out of the side of the coffin and seized Alex by the hand. It happened so fast, it was a blur. In the same motion, it yanked Alex's arm up to the elbow and into the hole it had made in the coffin. The iron cross fell from Alex's other hand and clanked to the ground. For a split second, Alex wore an expression of almost comedic puzzlement. I almost expected him to say, "Huh?" Instead, he began to scream, piercingly, blood-curdling screams of pure, unadulterated agony. He threw his head back, eyes squeezed shut, and screamed endlessly at the top of his lungs. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't just screams. There were some words in there too, and he was screaming, "Oh God, my arm, my arm, my arm! It's eating me! It's biting me!" For a moment, Scott and I could only stare in shock, and then with a sudden surge of adrenaline, I rushed forward and grabbed Alex's free hand, and at the same time, Scott broke out of his own paralysis and grabbed Alex's shoulders. We pulled back as hard as we could, trying to yank him free, but to no avail at all. Scott, he was no small guy. He had played football in high school, but whatever was in that box was stronger than both Scott and me combined. Still, we tried to save our friend. Alex screamed the whole time, and there were no words anymore, just screams. and dimly I could hear Scott shouting at me, "Pull, James! God damn it, pull!" But under all of that, I could faintly make out other sounds. Wet, ripping, smacking sounds. The sounds of teeth chomping, eating sounds. And they were coming from inside the box. Alex screamed louder than ever, and with a superhuman effort managed to pull about 4 inches of his forearm out of the hole in the coffin. I wish he hadn't. Those 4 inches had already been stripped down to a bloody bone. And I think I could see teeth marks in the bone itself. And then his arm was snatched savagely back in. Scott turned to me, face contorted with terror and desperation. He started to say something before he could. The thing in the coffin smashed another hole through the top of the coffin and shot its arm out. I only caught a glimpse of it. It moved so fast as a rattlesnake striking. But I saw enough. Its arm was as white as a corpse and skeletal. His fingers grotesquely long and thin, and each was tipped with long, black talons. Those razor-sharp talons seized Alex by the throat and ripped it out. Blood gushed from his shredded throat in a torrent, and both Scott and I were sprayed with it. Our childhood friend's life pumped out of his neck before our eyes. Alex stopped screaming. He looked at us slowly in a daze, all the colour drained from his face. He opened his mouth and it seemed like he was going to ask us a question. And then his eyes rolled back in their sockets and he slumped forward, over the coffin. "Oh, Jesus! Alex!" Scott wailed in horror. There was another of those awful, unearthly roars from the coffin, and then it began to rock back and forth on its platform as whatever was inside went into a frenzy. The coffin began to splinter and crack apart. The ancient chains around it snapped. It was breaking its way out. Reality fell away from me, and I just stood there calmly, watching this as if it was happening to someone else, somewhere else. As if I was watching it happen on another planet, looking through a telescope. If it hadn't been for Scott, I'd been just as dead as Alex. But then again, I'm probably going to be dead soon anyway. Right? I felt Scott grab my wrist. "Run!" He screamed in my ear, and that broke me out of my trance, and we fled the tomb. Document found by police in an empty cabin. Part 4. Let's get straight into that. We scrambled up the steps at the entrance to the tomb. Maddie and Samantha were waiting for us at the top. As soon as we emerged, they began hurling frantic questions at us. They had heard the screaming down below, and they demanded to know what happened and where Alex was. "He's dead!" Scott gasped. And they both went pale, eyeing the blood splattered on our clothes and faces. "Dead?" Maddie nearly screamed. "What do you mean he's dead?" "There's something down there, some kind of monster. It fucking killed Alex," Scott stammered. And they refused to believe us at first. They both thought this was some sort of sick prank that we were playing. I think they were both expecting Alex to pop up from underground at any second and yell boo. Or maybe that's just what they wanted to believe. The more we tried to convince them that we were telling the truth, the more upset they became. "Stop it!" Samantha yelled at us. "Just stop it! You're scaring us!" And right then, from the tomb behind us, there came another of those inhuman roars. A bony white arm with spindly fingers that ended in long black talons, caked with blood, shot out of the blackness and clawed at the air. We all screamed and jumped back. The arm reached into our direction. The second it passed from the line of darkness into the daylight, it began to smoke and singe. With a shriek of pain, it withdrew back into the dark. I made the connection instantly. "The light! We can't stand the light!" The four of us stood there, hearts racing, staring down into the mouth of the tomb. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was standing there in the shadows, just out of sight, glaring at us and waiting.
"What is it?" Maddie whimpered. "What is that thing?"
"I don't know," Scott answered. "I don't want to know. Let's just get the fuck out of here." And for the first time since we had exited the tomb, I realized how late it had gotten. It was nearly 9 p.m. The light was growing dim, the shadows growing long. I glanced fearfully towards the western sky. The sun had begun to set, and nightfall was fast approaching. "He's right," I said. "We have to get out of here now, before it gets dark."
But Alex,"
Samantha began. "He's gone," Scott screamed. "There's nothing we can do for him." "Scott's right," I added in a softer tone. "We can't help him. We have to save ourselves." And with a last terrified look at the tomb, we took off running back in the direction of the cabin. It took us around 15 minutes to reach the cabin, and the sunlight faded even more in that time. As we went around the side in the direction of Scott's car, I threw a look to the west. The sun was just a faint orange arc on the horizon, and night was almost upon us. We piled into the car and Scott rifled frantically through his pockets for the keys. I saw his eyes widen in sudden, cold realization. "What is it?" I asked, even though I knew what he was going to say. "The keys are in the cabin." And then, from the woods, from the direction we had just come from, I heard one of those demonic roars. Scott and I exchanged a look. "I'm going in for them." "Scott, no!" But he'd already thrown his door open and was rushing to the cabin. He went inside and disappeared from view. And there was another roar, and it sounded closer. We waited for minutes that seemed to last hours. I kept looking around the car for any sign of that thing, but by then it was too dark to see very far. The roars kept coming, and each one sounded closer than the last. It was coming for us. At last, Scott emerged from the cabin, holding the keys. He made a beeline for the car, and I was convinced that thing was going to jump out of the shadows and pounce on him before he made it. But it didn't. Scott then got back into the car and slammed his door. "Got him!" "Thank God," I whispered. Scott shoved in the key and turned the ignition. The engine started and the headlights came on, and we all screamed again. It was standing directly in front of the car, less than 10 feet in front of us. As soon as the headlights hit it, it shrieked and leaped out of view, vanishing in a blink of an eye. I only saw it for a split second, but that was a split second too long. What I saw is forever imprinted in my mind, if I live to be 100, which isn't very likely, given my current predicament. I will never forget that horrible sight. It will haunt me every time I close my eyes, in nightmares to come for the rest of my life. It was the sum of every childhood fear, every boogeyman and monster hiding under the bed and in the closet, every scary movie monster that terrified us growing up. It was unnaturally tall, at least 7 feet, and slightly stooped over. It was gaunt to the point of emaciation, clad in tattered black rags and white as ivory. Matted, filthy black hair ran down its shoulders and back almost to its waist. Its thin arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees. But its face was the worst part. Its face was grotesquely elongated, its chin almost reaching down to its chest. Its cheeks were sunken and hollow. Its eyes were totally black and soulless. They didn't seem to reflect the light at all. And its mouth seemed to run the width of its face and was hideously wide, at least several inches. Jagged black fangs that were at least an inch long lined the top and bottom. It almost appeared to be grinning at us. Maybe it was. It was splattered with the fresh blood and gore. I saw it for only a split second, but that was long enough. Beside me, Scott was nearly hysterical. "Shit, shit, shit," he kept screaming. "Drive!" I shouted. He put the car in gear and slammed down on the gas pedal, and with a shriek of rubber, the car took off heading down the dirt road away from the cabin. For a few seconds, I actually thought we were going to get away, that we were going to escape from this nightmare. We were in Scott's car, driving away from that horror and towards safety. We were going to make it. And then I caught movement in the passenger side rearview mirror and turned to look out the back. That thing, it was sprinting after the car, down on all fours like an animal, moving with the speed of hyenas charging a pack of antelope, and it was catching up. I turned to Scott. "Faster! Go faster!" "What is it?" He didn't take his eyes off the road. "It's coming after us! Go faster!" "Oh shit!" He gave the car more gas. We were going at least 80 miles an hour, and the trees outside were rushing by in a blur. And still, the creature was gaining on us. I watched helplessly as it overtook us, running alongside the speeding vehicle. And one of its talons swiped out lightning quick, and there was a boom, and the car began to shudder violently. "What the fuck was that?" Scott yelled. "It's slashing the tires," I replied. I saw its talon strike again, and there was another boom, and the car shuddered worsened. It began to lurch violently from one side of the road to the other, and Scott struggled in vain to regain control. The car swerved off the road, and I saw a huge tree directly in our path, coming up fast to meet the speeding car. I saw Scott's eyes widen in horror at the impending impact. I heard Maddie and Samantha scream in the back seat, and then we crashed. Document found by the police in an empty cabin. Part 5. Let's get straight into that. Miraculously, none of us was seriously injured or knocked unconscious in the impact. Both Scott and I were jolted forward in our seats and then immediately knocked back by the airbags as they deployed. For about 20 seconds, we just sat there, stunned by the sudden, unexpected collision. There was only the sounds of our breathing and the hiss of steam from the destroyed engine. Scott turned to check on the girls. "You two all right?" "I think so," Maddie said with a groan. "Yeah," Samantha muttered. Scott turned to me. "What about you?" I was rubbing my nose, which was bleeding from the impact with the airbag. "I think it might have been broken. Other than that, I didn't seem to be hurt." "I'm fine," I told him. With a groan, I turned to the passenger side window. A hideous, bleached white face with black eyes grinned at me with a mouth full of black fangs. They were standing less than 4 inches away from me, only a thin pane of glass separating us. I recoiled in a horrified shout. "Fuck!" The others saw it too, and panic ensued. "Jesus Christ!" Scott shouted. He flung open his door and leaped from the totaled vehicle. The girls had already fled. The monstrosity kept its gaze fixed upon me. It raised one of its hands and raked its claws slowly down the glass. Screech! I flung myself to the other side of the car and lunged out of Scott's door. The 4 of us scrambled hastily back onto the road and began running back in the direction of the cabin. And behind us, I could hear glass shattering and metal being smashed. The thing was attacking Scott's car. "Hurry!" Scott panted. The cabin was about a mile away. I could see its lights in the distance, our last beacon of refuge. We were about halfway there when I heard the beast roar behind us. I knew if I turned, I would see it hurling towards us like a projectile. We ran at top speed. My lungs ached for oxygen, but I didn't slow down, knowing that if I did so, would guarantee a gruesome and probably agonizing death. I had never been more terrified in my life than I was on that night as we raced back to safety, all the while hearing that creature chasing after us and catching up. I could sense it directly behind me, could almost feel its putrid breath on the back of my neck. Any second, I expected to feel its talons bury themselves into my back. It probably would have taken me next if Samantha, who was running almost parallel to me, Scott and Maddie were both ahead of us, hadn't stumbled right then. The thing diverted its attention to her, spotting easy prey. I heard her screaming. When I turned, it was on her, clawing at her leg. She looked at me with her pleading eyes. "Help me!" I didn't think, I just acted, purely on instinct. Whipping my phone out of my pocket, I ran to her, turning on the flashlight app and shining it into the demon's eyes. It screeched and flung itself back, shielding its face with its claws. And with one arm flung out holding my phone towards the creature, and to ward it off, I helped Samantha to her feet, and supporting her as best I could, we hobbled after our friends. Maddie and Scott were waiting for us in front of the cabin. When they saw us, they began gesturing and shouting urgently for us to hurry up. "Samantha's hurt," I said as we arrived. "The thing got her." "Let's get her inside," Scott said, and he and Maddie helped me carry her into the cabin. We sat her down on the couch and Maddie began examining her leg. For the first time, I saw how badly she had been injured. I hadn't had a chance to study her leg during our mad dash to safety. 4 ragged, deep gashes had been clawed into the back of her calf, and she was bleeding heavily. "Oh my God!" Maddie cried in alarm. "We have to stem the bleeding," I said. "How?" Scott demanded. None of us had any medical training. "We have to make a tourniquet," I said. It was all I could think of. I took off my belt and handed it to Maddie. "Fasten it around her leg as tightly as you can, above the wound." And Scott said, "I'll see if I can find some medical supplies." He began to rummage around the kitchen. Eventually, he found a first aid kit. By then, the bleeding had slowed down somewhat, and the wounds had looked like they were beginning to clot. Maddie wrapped Samantha's leg as carefully as she could. The whole time, Samantha stayed silent, staring dully off into space. I think she was in shock. When Maddie was finished, we flung ourselves down on the couch beside Samantha and exhaled heavily, trying to get our racing hearts under control. It was the first chance we'd had to do that and to relax since this whole horrible mess had begun. "We need to call for help," Scott said. "Yeah," I replied, already fishing out my phone. I dialed 911 and got no response. What the hell? I tried again. "Shit, my phone's not working." "I'll try," Maddie said, taking out her own phone. I watched her dial, watched her wait, and watched as a puzzled look come over her face. "Mine's not working either." Scott already had his phone out and he tossed it down with a look of disgust. "God damn it!" "You too?" I asked. This is fucking crazy," he said. "None of our phones are working. What the fuck's the deal?" Scott had a point. We weren't exactly in an area that was a wireless hotspot, but we should have had some reception. Just the day before, Samantha had managed to call her mother and younger sister back home to check in. "This doesn't make any sense," Maddie exclaimed, examining her screen. "It says I have signal." I started messing around with my phone. I tried calling anyone who would answer. My brother, my parents, my boss. None of my calls would go through. I tried texting, and with the same result. Then I tried accessing Google, and all I got was a 404 error screen. It was at this point that I started to feel uneasy. As I said earlier, Alex's cabin didn't have Wi-Fi, but I had a data plan with my provider and should have still been able to access the internet. and there was no reason for all three of our phones to have stopped working at the same time. No reason we shouldn't be able to contact the outside world. A chilling certainty began to form in my mind, a certainty I tried to reject because of its frightening implications. I told myself that it was too illogical, too ridiculous, too insane to be true, and that this was just some sort of extremely inopportune coincidence. But that couldn't disguise what I knew in my heart to be the cold, hard truth. And finally, I said it aloud. Maybe that thing somehow prevented us from reaching anyone. Bullshit, Scott snorted. That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. Well, how else do you explain it? I shot back. Well, that's crazy. Any crazier than anything else that's happened tonight? I retorted. To this, he didn't have an answer. We all fell silent for a while.
You guys, what the fuck are we gonna do?
Maddie asked, and she sounded scared. I took charge. We just have to get through the night. We're safe here. That thing's scared of the light. When the sun comes up, we can walk out of here on foot and get help. The next town's only 5 miles away. I tried to sound reassuring and confident. Trust me, we'll be okay. We'll make it. And suddenly the lights began to flicker. We looked around alarmed. What the hell's going on? Scott asked. And right then a terrifying realization dawned upon me. I felt as if I had just been splashed with a bucket of ice water. Oh no, I whispered.
What?
Maddie demanded, an edge of fear in her voice. The generator, I said. We had been so stupid, we had forgotten. The generator that supplied electricity to the cabin. The generator that had been running all day. The generator that hadn't been refueled since that morning was almost out of gas. The generator that was outside in the dark. Wow, 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 wow. And another one. Wow. Absolutely chilling, nail-biting horror there from the wonderful, wonderful mind of CarlB1961. Guys and girls, please do take a second to head over to Carl's Reddit, of which I'll leave the link to in the description box below. Hit a quick upvote on his stories, possibly leave a nice comment thanking him for his amazing entertainment and incredible imagination. It really helps him build a presence on the Reddit platform. As ever, you know the drill here. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really, really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? Don't forget, if you want to have more early access or even some exclusives, exclusive discounts on merchandise, shout outs in videos, etc, etc, you can sign up now for my DMT's Cryptid Crew membership, members only area, which you'll find just below the subscribe button, or of course, like every video, there are links in the description box below. More from this series and the final to this series in the next couple of days, so please do look forward to that. I hope you guys do as much as I. And as always, above all guys, I hope you're well and happy, keeping focused and busy. And remember, be safe, not sorry.